Hello, my name's Annie.
I'm Lisa, and I'm going to interview you for the position at Bellingham Technical College.
Okay, great.
So tell us about why you're interested in this job.
I'm interested in this job because Bellingham Technical College has really small class sizes, and so I feel like I'll be able to work with my students more one-on-one, which I'm really excited to do.
Okay. Tell us about your Tesl certificate program. It says here you followed a PSYOP model. Please explain 3 key points of this model that have influenced your teaching.
Yeah, I took the certificate program at Western, and we did a lot with the PSYOP model. I think that the main thing for me, the biggest one, has been that no matter what the lesson is, you have to include reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And I think that that's really important because a lot of students, they learn in different ways. And so I think it's difficult if you just do one of those, because then maybe a student that's more auditory doesn't really learn as much. But if you do a lesson that's all auditory, maybe a student that needs to write more to learn, it's not going to help them. So I think that if you're using all 4 in every lesson, it really helps students of all different learning strategies. Another reason that I really like it is that it really focuses on adapting the lesson to students' needs, which I think is really important in a school like BTC where the students come from all sorts of different backgrounds, and so they all have very different English abilities. So incorporating that adaptation into the lesson I think is really important so that students don't get left behind in class. And I think that the last reason that it's really important is that it provides a lot more structure to a lesson, so it's a lot more clear what you're teaching and how you're teaching it. And I think that sort of structure is really helpful for the students as well, because I feel like it helps them to know exactly where they're going and what they're doing, and it makes it easier to go through the lesson as a class.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, so we greatly value active participation by students. How would you foster greater student participation and interaction for all students?
I try to make every lesson go towards, after the first maybe 15 minutes, small groups, because that way the students are working more closely so they can feel more comfortable sharing and talking. Because even if we're doing a class activity as a whole class, some of the students might not feel as comfortable sharing in front of everyone, even in a small classroom. So I think encouraging participation in small groups really helps students, especially ones that are a little more shy.
Okay. All right. So what is the most challenging behavioral situation you have ever dealt with in the classroom, and how did you react?
I haven't encountered very many challenging situations yet. Most of my students have been really amazing. But I think that the one that's been the most difficult has been in my beginning level class that I volunteered in, because one student was very clearly ahead of all the other students in terms of ability, just because the class covered a really wide range of student abilities, which made things a little more difficult, even for the higher level students, because she would know the answers and so she would answer every question, but then the other students weren't getting a chance to answer. And so even though a lot of the questions I was asking were kind of reach questions for the other students, I wanted them to have the time to think about it and try to answer, but they weren't being able to because of the student. So we had to kind of talk to her separately about not raising her hand for all the questions, because she is more high level, especially at speech.
Okay. How would you differentiate instruction in a multi-level classroom?
Yeah, I've had a lot of experience with this in the last few months at my volunteer work, and I think that the best way to go is to make the presentation something that all of the students can follow, and then with the activities, separate groups based on level so that students can work in their own level group, and that way the higher level groups can use higher level grammar, and when I go to talk to them I can help introduce even higher levels of grammar. And the lower level groups can kind of just focus on things like speech and production, so that it's maybe less difficult for them to keep up, and that way the higher level students aren't bored.
Okay. Alright, so we require teachers to collaborate on creating curriculum and test team teaching. Would you be effective at this, and why?
I think that this would be really good for me because I work better as a team than I do by myself. I really enjoy having other people's opinions before I finish a lesson plan. I usually like to have my classmates look through them with me, because it's really helpful for me both to have someone read through mine, and so I can just talk through it with someone, and also to read through someone else's. I can kind of think about what I'm doing with mine and compare and make it better.
Okay.
So that's really helpful for me.
Okay. So the final question I have for you is, describe one of your typical 4 skills integrated lessons for beginning level adults. You can choose immigrant or international students.
I'll describe my lesson that I taught in a beginning level class. it was a lesson that was focused on riding the bus, and so at the beginning of class, we kind of warmed up by just talking through some verbs that they had been learning recently, and then we went through our vocabulary, and I gave a bit of a model on how to use each of the words and on different questions you could ask. And then after that, I split the class into two groups. One of them was for the lower level students, and the other one was for the higher level. And the lower level students worked on, they both worked on a matching activity together, and then the lower level students worked on reading from a script and practicing the speech of it, as well as they did a little more work with the vocabulary items so that they could practice saying them, because that group needed a little more chance to feel confident speaking. And then towards the end of the class, they were able to fill in some of the blanks in the scripts, which is actually an activity that I had originally prepared for my higher level students, because that's what they started out with. They started out with a fill in the blank script to practice with each other, and then after that, they moved on to a note card with like speaking guides, so that they could practice having that conversation like with some structure, but not totally independently.
Okay.
And then towards the end, all the students shared what they learned in the class.
Okay, so that's all the questions I have for you. Do you have any questions or comments for me?
Yeah, I was wondering how many hours a week would you expect to be put in the classroom?
Maybe 20 to 30 hours.
20 to 30 hours in the class? Okay, that's all. That's my only question.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
It was nice to meet you.